Before we begin, please tap that like button, subscribe to our channel, leave a comment, and share your thoughts below. It helps the story reach more hearts. You won't regret sticking with this one to the end. Scarlett Banks was born in a neighborhood most people drove through with their doors locked and windows up. South Atlanta wasn't the kind of place that made headlines unless something burned or broke. But even as a child, Scarlett carried a kind of quiet defiance in her gaze, like the world didn't scare her because she already knew she would outgrow it. By 10, she was reading medical journals for fun. By 14, she was tutoring her older cousin through college algebra. By 17, she was valedictorian and bound for Emory University on a full ride, the pride of a community that had learned to stop hoping. Her mother, Laverne, worked 3 jobs. Her father, gone before she could say her first word. Her life had no room for luxury, just books, ambition, and late-night prayers whispered into her pillow. Scarlett learned early that intelligence wasn't enough. She had to be flawless, charming but not threatening, brilliant but not loud, exceptional but never arrogant. And she was. In Emory's neuroscience program, Scarlett made waves. Her work on pediatric cognitive mapping earned her a lab assistantship before she turned 22. She stayed up nights building models, scanning toddler brain images, mapping neuroplasticity in cases of early trauma. Professors whispered that she'd be one of the youngest first author publishers in the field, maybe even a Nobel hopeful if she kept her momentum. But all the momentum in the world couldn't prepare her for him. It started on a gray Friday morning, nothing special. Scarlett had barely slept the night before, prepping slides for a symposium on neuromodulation in children with auditory processing disorders. Her nerves were tangled. The room was packed. Industry giants and international guests lined the seats. She adjusted her blazer twice and reminded herself to breathe. Then he walked in. Daniel Smith. He wasn't on the official speaker list. But the moment he entered, the atmosphere shifted. Black designer suit, charcoal eyes, that easy, unbothered stride of a man used to owning any room he entered. Founder of Neuronexus, biotech prodigy, the golden boy of Atlanta's startup scene. Whispers flew around the room like sparks. He didn't sit. He leaned against the back wall, arms folded, eyes locked on her. Scarlett kept speaking, but her rhythm faltered. Halfway through her Q&A, he raised his hand. "Interesting hypothesis," he said, smooth voice projecting through the micless air. "But your model assumes prefrontal activation can compensate for early sensory deprivation. What happens when emotional input skews processing before age 4? The question wasn't malicious. It was surgical and devastatingly intelligent. Scarlett blinked. He smiled, and just like that, he had her attention. They spoke after the session. What started as a critique turned into a deep-dive conversation about synaptic, remodeling, data scarcity, and the ethics of predictive diagnostics. 20 minutes stretched into 2 hours. He didn't flirt, not the way most men did. There were no lingering stares or lazy compliments, just a steady, focused intensity, like he wasn't just listening to her. He was decoding her. 3 weeks later, she got a message on her lab's voicemail. "Scarlett, Daniel Smith, I want you on my team, but not in a lab coat. Call me." She played it 3 times. Thought about deleting it. She even wrote a long list of reasons why she should say no: her research, her fellowship application, her purpose. But the 4th time she hit play, she picked up the phone. The job wasn't official. There was no contract, no salary, no business card. Just an invitation. She started showing up at Neuronexus brainstorming sessions. At first, she offered ideas quietly. Then, she stayed behind to rewrite pitch decks and coach Daniel on neurolinguistics to sharpen his investor presentations. In private, he said she had CEO energy. In public, she was introduced as a close friend helping with logistics. Scarlett should have asked questions, but she didn't, because it felt like the beginning of something rare. At 25, she moved into Daniel's Buckhead penthouse. He didn't propose, didn't call her his girlfriend. There was no label, just a toothbrush beside his, a mug with her name on it in the kitchen, a second keycard in her bag. They were building an empire. She convinced herself that was enough. She told herself the ring would come later, the credit would come later, that for now, staying close to brilliance, even if it wasn't her name on the wall, was part of the sacrifice. It would pay off. It had to. Scarlett's days blurred into Daniel's rhythms. Investor calls at dawn. Strategy meetings mid-morning. She sat beside him on flights, in boardrooms, behind velvet ropes. Always near, never seen. At night she revised his speeches while nursing a baby monitor on her lap, because then came the children. Not one, not two. Triplets. Nova, Ari, and Kai. 3 miracles born on a rainy Thursday in September. She labored for 19 hours. Daniel flew in on hour 15, stayed for the final 10 minutes, and cut one umbilical cord for the photos. Scarlett never complained. She named them, fed them, rocked them to sleep while reading neuroscience papers aloud so she wouldn't fall behind. When Daniel's mother suggested a nanny, Scarlett said, "No. These are mine," she whispered. "I've already given away too much." The world never saw the woman behind the genius. But without her, his empire would have collapsed before its second Series A. Scarlett never stopped working, but she also stopped asking for recognition. 6 years passed. She buried her dreams quietly, folded her ambition into bedtime stories and biometric algorithms whispered into Daniel's ear while he slept. She had been a rising star. Now she was a ghost in designer heels. But even ghosts remember who they used to be. And ghosts, they always come back. Have you ever given your all, your talent, your dreams, your voice, for someone else's spotlight? Drop a comment if you've ever felt invisible while helping someone else rise. The first night Scarlett spent in Daniel's penthouse, she didn't sleep. The room was vast, glass walls, marble floors, a view that looked out over the Atlanta skyline like a throne above the city. But Scarlett didn't feel like a queen. She felt like a guest. Her suitcase sat unopened beside the door. Her shoes lined neatly against the wall. She didn't know where to put them. Daniel walked in past midnight, unbothered. He tossed his jacket on the velvet chair and dropped a kiss on her forehead. "Long day," he murmured. "Investor pullout in Paris. Fixed it." Then he vanished into the bathroom. No questions, no welcome. Scarlett sat at the edge of the bed, staring at the skyline, wondering if she had just walked out of her life and into someone else's. 2 weeks later, she stopped wearing her badge to Neuronexus. She still came to the office, but only after hours or on weekends. Daniel said appearances mattered. Too many voices confused the narrative, he explained. Instead, she worked from home, edited strategy memos, drafted responses for the board. She'd finish a 40-page investor brief and watch as Daniel skimmed it on the balcony, then quoted it verbatim in an interview later. Scarlett didn't flinch when he called it his perspective. She just nodded. "You sounded clear." That became their pattern. He built the brand. She built the foundation. His world was relentless. Events, fundraisers, charity galas. Scarlett stood beside him in couture gowns he selected, smiling at donors, laughing at jokes that weren't funny. She became fluent in the art of being agreeable. Always 2 steps behind. Always dressed for roles she never auditioned for. In private, he praised her. "You keep me sharp," he said once, dragging his thumb across her lips before a dinner party. "Like a mirror that reflects my best." She wanted to tell him she was more than a mirror. But mirrors don't speak. So she stayed silent. When the kids came, everything changed, and nothing did. The pregnancy was rough. Triplets meant bed rest by month 5, hospital stays by month 6, and daily monitoring by month 7. Daniel flew in and out of appointments, depending on how his pitch calendar looked. Scarlett never asked him to stay. She knew better than to interrupt a man chasing greatness. Instead, she asked the nurses to leave the room during ultrasounds, just so she could cry in peace. After the babies were born, the penthouse turned into chaos. Nova was colicky. Ari barely slept. Kai refused bottles. Scarlett ran on 3 hours of broken sleep a night. Her body was sore, her mind foggy, but she still managed to create presentation slides between feedings. She once drafted a 24-page deck while pumping milk at 3 a.m. Daniel didn't notice. He only saw results. "You're incredible," he told her after one particularly brutal week. "You handle things. That's what I love about you." She smiled, but that night she stared at herself in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman holding the toothbrush. She thought about leaving once, just once. It was 2:12 a.m. The kids had finally gone quiet. The apartment smelled like lavender and exhaustion. Scarlett sat on the kitchen floor with a cracked phone in her hand, rereading her old neuroscience notes. In another world, she'd be finishing her dissertation. In another life, her name would be on the cover of journals. She could almost feel the weight of the pen. But then Kai stirred, and Nova coughed, and Scarlett closed the notebook. She told herself she'd revisit the dream later, once things calmed down, once the chaos passed. But chaos never passes when you're the only one holding everything together. By year 5, Scarlett had become invisible in plain sight. Daniel's company valuation hit 9 figures. Investors hailed him as a visionary. Tech magazines printed his face in glossy spreads. Not once did they mention her. She didn't care, or at least that's what she told herself. Until one morning, during a pre-launch meeting, Daniel said something that made her chest tighten. "I built this from the ground up," he said to a group of international funders, "all on instinct and grit." Scarlett sat at the end of the long table, holding a cup of coffee she didn't even want. No one acknowledged her. Later, in the car, she turned to him. "You could have mentioned the team." He shrugged. "They know." "No, they don't." Daniel glanced out the window. "Does it matter?" Scarlett looked at him for a long time, and then she looked at herself. And for the first time she began to wonder if love should feel like being erased. The thing about Daniel was, he never hit her, never yelled, never called her names. But emotional abandonment isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a closed door when you needed an open one. Sometimes it's silence in the room when you're crying in the dark. And sometimes it's handing someone your genius, only to watch them rename it as theirs. Still, Scarlett stayed. She stayed when the board rejected her proposal to create a subdivision focused on pediatric research under Neuronexus. Daniel said it wasn't the right time. That kid stuff wasn't profitable enough. She stayed when Daniel's sister made a comment at brunch. "You're basically a glorified nanny, right?" She stayed when her emails started getting forwarded to assistants instead of replied to directly. Because love, when tangled with loyalty, can become a trap you don't realize you're in. And Scarlett? She still believed a man who challenged her mind at that symposium might come back. She was still waiting for him, until that night at the Fox Theater. But that's another chapter. This one ends in silence. In Scarlett standing on the balcony of the penthouse at 3:43 a.m., barefoot, clutching a baby monitor in one hand and a mug of tea in the other. The city below was glowing with promises it had no intention of keeping. Scarlett exhaled slowly and whispered to the sky, "I know who I used to be. I just need to remember." The ring box sat untouched in Scarlett's nightstand drawer. Not because Daniel had proposed and she declined, but because she had once bought it herself, on a random afternoon passing. A tiny shop tucked between a florist and a bookstore in Midtown. It was delicate. Thin gold band, no diamonds. Just simple, honest. She wasn't waiting for Daniel to buy it. She was waiting for the courage to admit she might never need one. But courage was hard to summon when every day required her to be a dozen things for everyone except herself. Scarlett's mornings began before the sun. She'd wake to the buzz of Daniel's first calendar alert, usually around 4:45 a.m. She'd make his protein smoothie, answer his overnight emails, and pack his notes for whatever pitch or breakfast summit awaited him that day. By 6, she was rocking Ari back to sleep after a nightmare. By 7:30, she was ironing Daniel's shirt because the housekeeper had left a crease in the collar. By 8, she was editing Daniel's keynote speech while simultaneously changing Kai's diaper and coaxing Nova into her favorite socks. All before she'd had her first sip of coffee. No one called her wife. She wasn't introduced at events. She wasn't credited in bios. She wasn't listed as a co-founder, though her fingerprints were all over every piece of Neuronexus's DNA. At best, she was the mother of his kids. At worst, she was invisible. And yet, she knew more about Daniel's company than half the executive board. She could recite the monthly burn rate, identify investor preferences from the cadence of their emails, and rewrite an entire patent application while breastfeeding. But knowledge without recognition is just silence with a smarter vocabulary. Daniel's world was obsessed with precision. He wanted every detail immaculate. Dinner reservations on time, speaking points tailored to audience types, socks matching tie tones, everything optimized. Scarlett adapted fast. She was never late, never asked twice, never forgot. She learned how to whisper reminders in the exact tone that wouldn't make him feel corrected. She absorbed his moods like rainfall, reading his jawline tension, his blinking rate, the pauses between sentences. She could tell when he was losing a deal before the client ever spoke. Her job wasn't listed on paper. But she was the glue, and Daniel liked things that didn't need explanation. One night, during a charity gala for neurodivergent youth, a donor mistook her for an event coordinator. "Excuse me," the woman said. "Can you bring another chair for the table?" Scarlett smiled politely and fetched it. Daniel didn't correct the woman. Later in the car, she brought it up gently. "I think she thought I was staff." "You handled it well," he replied. "No reason to embarrass anyone." Scarlett looked out the window and didn't respond, but inside, something in her shifted. She wasn't embarrassed. She was tired. The triplets became her world. Nova was the emotional one, always watching, always listening. Ari had a quiet rage beneath his calm exterior. And Kai? Kai was joy, laughter, mischief wrapped in curls. Scarlett built routines around them. Breakfast stories, playroom labs, afternoon nature walks. She used neuroscience games to stimulate their early cognition, tracking their speech and motor development with precision that would make any academic proud. She wasn't just raising them. She was shaping brilliance. She told herself that was enough. But at night, once they were asleep, and Daniel was away, again, Scarlett would sit on the floor with her old journals and wonder who she was without everyone else's needs to fulfill. Daniel's family never accepted her. They smiled, they nodded, but they never saw her. His mother once asked, "Are you still doing the brain thing, or are you full-time at home now?" Scarlett replied, "Both." The woman raised an eyebrow. "Ah, so not really either." It stung, not because it was cruel, but because it was strategic. Daniel never corrected her either. Later, when Scarlett asked why, he said, "She doesn't mean anything by it. Just ignore her." But ignoring only works when your self-worth isn't being chipped away by people you're forced to sit beside. Scarlett learned to keep her wins to herself. When an academic journal reached out to reprint one of her early conference papers, she celebrated alone. When her toddlers used advanced sentence structure months before their age group, she wrote it in her notebook and smiled silently. When her former professor emailed asking if she'd consider returning to research, part-time, she drafted a reply, deleted it, and never mentioned it to Daniel. There wasn't space for two stars in their household. One had to dim. Daniel believed in merit. He often said, "People rise to their level. If they don't, they weren't ready." Scarlett had risen. Quietly. Repeatedly, without applause, and yet she was still at the bottom of the guest list. On their 6th anniversary, not of marriage but of the day she moved in, Daniel brought home an orchid. No dinner, no card, no reflection, just a flower and a nod. Scarlett accepted it with a smile, but after he left the room she gently placed it in the trash, not out of anger, but because it was too beautiful to be wasted on pretending. The neighbors in Buckhead referred to her as Daniel's woman. Not partner, not fiancé, just an attachment. One woman once asked, "Do you ever miss working, or are you fulfilled by domestic things?" Scarlett responded kindly, always kindly. But at home, she dug out her old thesis notes, dusted off her Emory folders, and reread the words she once wrote about cognitive imprinting and emotional scaffolding in early childhood. She remembered how she used to believe she'd change the world. She laughed bitterly, then tucked the papers beneath her pillow, as if they could remind her who she used to be in her dreams. On a rainy Saturday, while Daniel was away at a tech summit in San Diego, Scarlett took the kids to a museum. They wandered through exhibits, hands sticky with snacks, faces lit with curiosity. At one point they stumbled upon a neuroscience display, a replica of a child's brain, surrounded by digital projections showing how language evolved through the first 3 years. Scarlett stood frozen. That was her model. The design, the mapping, the structure. She had pitched it in a research forum years ago, before Neuronexus, before Daniel. Someone had recreated it. She wasn't credited, but she knew it was hers. She touched the glass and whispered, "Still here." Have you ever watched someone take your idea and present it like it was their own? Tell us your story below. Your voice matters here. Also, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and like this video before we continue. That night, Scarlett put the kids to bed and sat in the living room with a glass of water. No wine, no distractions, just silence. She opened a blank document, typed 2 words, Chapter 1, She didn't know what the book would be, but she knew it had to start somewhere. Because if she waited any longer, she'd vanish completely, and she'd worked too hard, dreamed too vividly, sacrificed too deeply, to disappear without leaving her name behind. There's a specific kind of heartbreak that doesn't come with betrayal or abuse. It comes from being overlooked, from standing beside someone for years, only to realize you were always invisible to them. That was the heartbreak Scarlett carried, not loud, but constant. In Daniel's world, gratitude was rare. Applause was for shareholders. Appreciation came in transaction form, bonuses, gifts, performance charts. Scarlett didn't get bonuses. She got thank yous whispered when no one else was around, and even those were infrequent. But she kept showing up, because somewhere deep inside, she still believed love wasn't always loud, that maybe what they had was unspoken but understood. It wasn't. She noticed it one morning during a team retreat in Charleston. Daniel had flown his executive leads to a private villa for a 3-day vision reset. Scarlett came along, not officially, of course. She was there to watch the kids, prep Daniel's speaking notes, and handle logistics while the others toasted mimosas. During a team dinner, Daniel stood to give a toast. He praised the CTO for building the architecture, thanked his CFO for loyalty, nodded to his lead strategist, saying, "She makes me look smarter than I am." Scarlett waited, smiling, expecting something. He raised his glass. To the team that made this possible, then he sat. Later that night, she found him on the patio, scrolling through emails. "Did you forget someone?" she asked gently. He looked up, confused. "Tonight," she clarified. "At the table." Daniel blinked. "What do you mean?" Scarlett folded her arms. "You thanked the strategist who repeats half the things I write for you, the CTO who came in 2 years ago, but you didn't mention me." He sighed. "Scarlett, it wasn't that serious. It was to me." He set the phone down. "Why do you need public validation for something you already know?" She froze. "Because I'm tired of pretending I don't. Recognition isn't ego. It's survival when you've been reduced to silence for too long." Scarlett didn't want to be a statue behind a titan. She didn't want a plaque or a post on Instagram. She just wanted to be named, to exist. Back in Atlanta, Scarlett began shrinking in new ways. She declined more events, avoided investor mixers. She stayed with the kids more, not because she was retreating, but because it was the only place she still felt useful. The triplets saw her. They knew her worth instinctively. Ari would hold her hand without being asked. Nova drew family pictures where Mommy had a superhero cape. Kai once said, "Mommy builds brains," and it nearly brought Scarlett to tears. Daniel, meanwhile, was gearing up for a tech conference in Toronto. He invited Celeste Monroe to speak on a brand equity panel. Scarlett noticed the email. She didn't ask questions. She just filed it away, quietly. By this point, Scarlett had created an entire archive of her contributions, ghostwritten policy, drafts, investor summaries, early-stage concept frameworks, even the product roadmap skeleton, all in a hidden folder. She didn't know why she was collecting them. She only knew that one day, someone might need to know the truth, even if that someone was herself. One evening, while Daniel was in LA and the kids were asleep, Scarlett opened her laptop and typed out a mock grant proposal for a new research initiative, early cognitive repair through applied neural patterning. She gave it a name, the Elise Protocol, after her grandmother, the first woman in her family to graduate college. She didn't know if it would go anywhere, but as she typed, her fingers moved like they remembered who she was. Every hypothesis poured from a place inside her that had been dormant for too long. She wasn't writing to impress anyone. She was writing to breathe. Daniel returned from LA with new branding deals, fresh partnerships, and another watch to add to his collection. Scarlett asked how it went. He grinned. "They love me. We're on the cusp of something massive." She smiled. But she didn't ask for details, because she knew what we meant in his language. It never included her. On the twins' 4th birthday, Daniel hosted a backyard brunch. The Smiths flew in from Buckhead. Neuronexus execs floated in with overpriced gifts and polite small talk. Celeste Monroe arrived late. Scarlett opened the door and froze. The woman stood poised in a red dress, heels high enough to rival ego. "Hey," Celeste said brightly. "I brought the twins a Montessori playset. Organic wood, of course." Scarlett smiled. "They'll love that." Celeste made herself at home, chatting with Daniel's father, helping herself to champagne, laughing at a volume slightly too high. Scarlett caught her touching Daniel's wrist once. Daniel didn't pull away. He didn't look at Scarlett either. That night, after the last balloon popped and the last dish was scrubbed, Scarlett sat at the kitchen counter with her notes. She stared at the Elise protocol outline and made a decision. She would apply to the University of Amsterdam's Advanced Neuroscience Fellowship, just to see, just to remember what it felt like to choose herself. Weeks passed. She said nothing to Daniel. But every day, she checked her email. Just once, just in case. Then one morning, as she poured cereal for Nova and tied Kai's shoelaces, her phone buzzed. She opened it casually, expecting a sale notification or a group chat alert. But there it was. Subject: Acceptance into UV Fellowship Cohort, 2025. Her hands trembled. She read it twice. 3 times. Then sat on the floor and cried. Quiet, breathless tears. Not because of joy, but because something dormant had just awakened. She didn't tell Daniel immediately. She wanted the right moment. But moments like that don't exist in relationships built on imbalance. So she chose a Tuesday night. They were having dinner. The kids had gone to bed. The TV was low. I got accepted into a neuroscience program in Amsterdam, she said softly. Daniel looked up from his phone. For a paper? For a full fellowship? Pause. Silence. Then, what about the kids? They'd come with me. Another pause. You're serious? She nodded. Very. Daniel exhaled. You'll be alone over there. No support, no family. I'll have me. And who's going to help you raise 3 kids while dissecting infant cognition? I've been doing that for 6 years already. He didn't say congratulations. He didn't ask for details. He just said, let me know what you need from me. Scarlett nodded, but in that moment she knew. He had never truly seen her, and she was done begging to be seen. That night, as she packed her old notebooks into a single suitcase, she whispered to herself, I'm not leaving for Amsterdam. I'm leaving for me. Scarlett had never cared for Atlanta's high society scene. The champagne always tasted like performance, and the smiles were stretched tight like corsets. Still, she'd gone to every gala, every launch, every award night. She showed up for Daniel, dressed in gowns he liked, styled to match the image he crafted. But that night felt different. Daniel's 37th birthday was being held at the Fox Theater, historic, lavish, dramatic. A venue meant for declarations, not whispers. Scarlett was late, though not by accident. She'd spent the day with the kids, helping Ari build a cardboard city, brushing Nova's hair into soft twists, and letting Kai spill pancake syrup all over her silk top. It was life, messy and beautiful. When she finally changed, she picked a simple black dress, no designer label, no statement heels, just her. In her hand, she carried a small, gift-wrapped box. Inside it, a worn leather journal filled with Daniel's early startup scribbles, annotated by her own ideas from 6 years ago, and a vintage Rolex, an exact model he once pointed at in a window and whispered, someday. She hadn't wrapped them for effect. She wrapped them out of love. That was her mistake. The moment she stepped into the theater's marbled lobby, she felt it. A shift. A chill. Something off. Laughter echoed from the mezzanine, where Daniel's circle congregated around the private bar. Scarlett made her way up the grand staircase. Every heel click felt louder than it should have. At the top, she spotted him. Daniel, smiling wide, dressed in a sharp navy tux, surrounded by familiar faces. And then she saw her. Celeste Monroe, the influencer turned brand consultant. Blonde, lithe, dressed in scarlet silk that clung like a second skin. She was feeding Daniel a piece of cake, laughing as icing smeared the corner of his mouth. Daniel leaned forward and let her wipe it away with her thumb. His family roared with amusement. Scarlett stood frozen. No one noticed her. Correction. No one acknowledged her. She blinked slowly, shifted her weight. Daniel finally turned as if hearing a distant bell. Oh, he said with a polite smile. Perfect timing. Perfect timing? Like she was a server delivering a second bottle of wine. We should talk, he added. Upstairs. No apology. No guilt. Just casual suggestion, like nothing had ruptured. Scarlett nodded. She followed him to one of the private suites overlooking the ballroom. The door clicked shut. He didn't offer her a seat. He didn't take one either. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope, set it on the glass table between them. Scarlett looked at it, said nothing. "It's a check," Daniel said. "4 million. Her throat tightened. "You deserve comfort," he continued. "Peace. The Decatur house is yours. The kids' tuition will be covered indefinitely. You won't have to work. You'll be free." Scarlett's grip on the gift box tightened. "Free?" she echoed. He nodded, as if he were offering her emancipation from a burden. Scarlett tilted her head. "And this is your idea of freedom?" Daniel didn't blink. "You've sacrificed a lot. This is me, making it right." She could have screamed. She could have hurled the journal at him, thrown the Rolex in his face, reminded him of every speech. She helped him write every algorithm she tested in the quiet corners of their shared life. But she didn't. Instead, she placed the wrapped gift on the table beside the envelope and smiled. "Thank you," she said softly. Daniel blinked, caught off guard. "For what?" he asked. "For finally letting me see." He opened his mouth, but she was already turning. She didn't even mention the watch. She didn't ask for an explanation. She didn't need one. Some truths arrive quietly. As she descended the staircase back into the ballroom, something inside her snapped into place, not like glass breaking, but like a bone finally aligning after a long dislocation. Celeste watched her pass, lips curled in amusement. Scarlett met her eyes and smiled, not out of spite, but because she already knew. Celeste wasn't the win. Daniel wasn't the prize, and she was no longer playing. Outside, the city felt warmer. She didn't cry. She didn't look back. She walked down the street in heels that suddenly didn't ache, shoulders lighter than they had been in years. She hailed a cab, told the driver to wait while she ran into the theater coat check. She collected her wrap, her clutch, and her dignity. Back at home, the kids were asleep. Scarlett knelt beside their beds, kissed their foreheads, and tucked the covers tighter. Then she stood in her quiet kitchen, the check still folded in her bag. She didn't tear it up. She didn't frame it either. She simply opened her laptop, pulled up her draft of the Elise Protocol, and whispered, "Now we begin," because for the first time in years, she had nothing tying her down, and everything pulling her forward. Scarlett stared at the check again under her kitchen light. It didn't shake in her hand. It didn't tremble with insult or heartbreak. It just sat there. $4 million. Enough to buy a new house, pay for years of education, disappear into a life of quiet comfort. But that wasn't the offer, was it? It wasn't about money. It was about silence, about making sure she walked away without a trace. No name, no credit, no noise. A quiet erasure with golden ink. Scarlett folded the envelope shut and slid it under a stack of unpaid childcare invoices Daniel had never seen. The next morning, Daniel didn't call. Neither did his mother. The only text she received was from Celeste. "No hard feelings. Life moves on. Wish you well, girl." No punctuation, just sugar-coated dismissal. Scarlett deleted it without a reply. She had wasted enough breath explaining herself to people who never listened. At sunrise, she took the kids to a quiet park in East Atlanta. There were no paparazzi, no tech investors, no publicists crafting optics. Just squirrels, swings, and the sound of her children laughing. Ari climbed a tree. Nova chased butterflies. Kai rolled down a grassy hill, giggling like gravity was a game. Scarlett sat on a bench, her hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee, her heart wrapped around something much bigger, freedom. Not the kind Daniel thought he was buying, the kind she was choosing for herself. Later that day, she called a realtor. "I'm looking for a rental," she said. "And 3 bedrooms, no frills, just safe and close to a decent library." The agent blinked on the other end of the video chat. "You're Mrs. Smith?" Scarlett smiled. Not anymore. Within a week, she had signed the lease. The Decatur house stayed empty. Daniel's gift sat in silence, unclaimed, unacknowledged. She didn't want the house he picked. She didn't want his piece packaged with strings. She wanted the kind she could build herself. The first night in the new place, Scarlett slept on the floor beside the kids, wrapped in blankets, their laughter echoing off bare walls. No designer furniture, no curated lighting, just warmth and clarity. The next morning she began building a home, not with chandeliers or luxury appliances, but with structure, discipline, and joy. She created reading corners, chore charts, kitchen dance-offs. Every corner had purpose, not for appearances, for life. One night, Nova asked, "Where's Daddy?" Scarlett paused, then said softly, "He's living somewhere else now." "Why?" Ari asked. Scarlett knelt beside them. "Because sometimes," she said gently, "grown-ups love differently. And sometimes one kind of love tries to make the other smaller. That's not a love we keep." Kai looked thoughtful. "Are we small?" Scarlett shook her head. "No," she whispered. "You're everything." At midnight, once they were asleep, she opened her laptop again. The Elise protocol document blinked on the screen. She began refining the model, adjusting the language, rewriting the abstract with sharper terms. And in between every line, she wove memory, late-night feedings, investor dinner notes written on napkins, the sound of Kai's first word, the silence after Daniel's praise for everyone but her. Every sentence carried her story, not of revenge, but reclamation. By the end of the month, she had packaged the research proposal. She uploaded it to 3 programs, Amsterdam, Berlin, and Edinburgh, just to see. She didn't tell Daniel. She didn't owe him updates anymore. He had made that clear when he handed her that envelope. Weeks later, a brown envelope arrived from the University of Amsterdam. Scarlett opened it slowly. Inside was a single sheet. Accepted. Her hands shook. This time not from heartbreak, but from victory, the kind no one could take credit for. She stood in the middle of her small kitchen and exhaled like she hadn't in years. She was going to Amsterdam. With the kids. Without the shadow. She packed light. Just clothes, toys, her laptop, and the journal Daniel never opened. She didn't leave a note. She didn't announce her departure. She simply informed Daniel via email. "We'll be relocating to Amsterdam for academic reasons. The children are safe. My attorney will be in touch with updated guardianship logistics. Respectfully, Scarlett." Daniel didn't reply immediately. When he finally did, it was short. "Let's talk when you're back." She never answered. Because she wasn't planning on coming back, not to him, and not to the version of herself he once tried to contain. Amsterdam was quieter, cooler, gentler. Scarlett enrolled the triplets in a bilingual school down the street. They loved it instantly. Nova joined the art club. Ari took interest in robotics. Kai became the official classroom comedian. Scarlett walked them to school every morning, rode her bike to the university, and returned each afternoon to warm hugs and finger paintings. She started teaching, started testing, started publishing again. No more ghostwriting. Her name was on the cover. First, bold. In her 3rd month there, she sat in a cafe reviewing peer notes when an unfamiliar voice said, "You left the formatting open." She looked up. Dr. Elias Vaney, geneticist, visiting from London. Tall, quiet, eyes like autumn. He smiled gently. "Sorry, I always notice grammar. It's annoying." Scarlett smiled back. "I'll survive." Their friendship began in the margins, shared lectures, coffees, research debates. He never asked about her past. He never made her feel like she had to earn his attention. He just listened. And when she spoke, he looked like he actually heard her. Not as a favor, as a reflex. One day she returned a research text he'd loaned her. Elias invited her in for tea. She wore a knit sweater, no makeup, hair undone. He poured chamomile. Her hands trembled slightly. "I'm not fragile," she said softly, "but I've been invisible." Elias reached across the table, gently touched her jaw. "I see you." Their lips met, and everything stilled. No theatrics, just honesty. Scarlett opened beneath him, not because she had to, because she chose to. Scarlett sat cross-legged on the wooden floor of her Amsterdam flat. No rugs, no fancy decor, just pale light pouring through the wide windows and the soft sound of wind outside. The triplets were asleep, finally. Their breathing patterns were different, but familiar to her now like lullabies. Kai's quiet snore, Ari's soft sigh, Nova's gentle murmur of unfinished dreams. Scarlett's laptop screen glowed in the dark. The file named the Elise protocol blinked with possibility. She didn't open it yet. Instead, she wrapped her arms around her knees and allowed herself a moment to feel it. Not fear, not doubt, but presence. It was the first night in 6 years where no one expected her to vanish behind someone else's shine. The flat wasn't glamorous, It smelled faintly of paint and freshly delivered cardboard boxes, but it was hers. She had chosen the location for its walkability, for the school nearby, for the way the sunlight hit the windows around noon and flooded the kitchen with warmth. There was no security gate, no housekeeper, no marble backsplash, but the fridge was covered in finger drawings and alphabet magnets, and that, to Scarlett, was enough. Earlier that day, she had taken the Triplets to a canal-side bookstore. Nova had found a Dutch picture book about mermaids. Kai insisted on a science puzzle. Ari, more quiet than usual, asked for a journal. "I want to write what I see," he said. Scarlett ruffled his hair. "Write everything," she told him. "Don't wait for someone else to tell your story." He nodded, solemn. Scarlett didn't realize until later that she was really speaking to herself. Back at the university, she kept her head down. Not from shame, but to focus. Her presence stirred whispers. A newcomer, American, published before re-entry. Rumors floated about her connection to Neuronexus. She ignored them. She wasn't there to prove anything. She was there to reclaim everything. Scarlett's lab station became her altar. Test results, brain scans, graphs, notebooks. She immersed herself in pediatric neural response modeling. She refined her original theories with newer methods, light pattern testing, language interruption recovery. She kept office hours, led lectures, built new mentorship programs for first general scholars. And when she went home, she became mommy again, making grilled cheese, patching, stuffed animals, and helping Kai pronounce bibliothèque correctly. Her days were long. At night, when the city grew quiet and the kids were tucked in, Scarlett would make tea and write. Not in academic terms, not for grants or forums. For herself, tiny essays, love notes, ideas scratched onto napkins, truths whispered only to her. That first night, sitting in the stillness, she picked up her journal and wrote one sentence: "I was always the blueprint." One afternoon, Elias stopped by her office. He held a thumb drive and 2 coffees. "I translated your data model into a simulation," he said, placing the drive on her desk. "Also, caffeine." Scarlett raised an eyebrow. "You did that in 2 nights?" Elias shrugged. 3. I slept once." She smiled. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to." There was no flirtation in his tone, just commitment, not to her, to the work, to the shared vision. They worked together for hours, shoulder to shoulder. When they spoke, it was easy, unforced. Scarlett didn't have to shrink her vocabulary or rephrase her ideas to protect a man's pride. She didn't have to wait for space. He made it, naturally. That night, she returned the research book he had loaned her. A gesture, nothing more. Elias invited her in. Scarlett hesitated, not because she was unsure of him, but because she wasn't sure of herself. He noticed. "You don't have to," he said quietly. "Not tonight, not ever." She stepped inside. "Tea?" he asked. She nodded. He poured chamomile. No sugar, just warm, comforting, present. As she reached for the cup, her fingers brushed his. She froze, so did he. Their eyes met. And then she said it, the truth that had lingered in her throat for months. "I'm not fragile," she whispered, "but I've been invisible." Elias didn't respond with pity. He didn't offer reassurance. He simply lifted his hand and touched her cheek. "I see you." They didn't kiss right away. The silence between them was tender, not tense. Scarlett leaned in slowly. Testing. Elias met her halfway. Their lips brushed, soft, unsure, real. It wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't fire. It was recognition. And sometimes, that's enough to start a wildfire. They moved together in the quiet. His hands traced the curve of her back, not possessively, but like reading a map with reverence. Scarlett trembled, not from fear, but from memory. This wasn't Daniel's world of performance and conquest. This was safe, intentional, slow. When he lifted her sweater over her head, she didn't flinch. When he kissed the stretch marks on her stomach, she didn't hide. When he whispered, "Tell me what you want," she didn't freeze. She answered, clearly, confidently, and he listened. Afterward, they lay wrapped together, breath slowing in sync. Elias didn't ask what came next. He didn't assign her a role. He simply said, "You didn't have to thank me for anything tonight." Scarlett turned toward him. "I wasn't going to." Then she smiled and whispered, "But thank you anyway." The next morning, Scarlett stood barefoot on her apartment's small balcony, a cup of mint tea warming her palms. The city moved gently around her, cyclists whispering past, tram bells clanging. In the distance, cafe tables filling with students and thinkers. Nothing rushed, nothing performed, and for the first time in years, neither did she. Inside, the kids were getting ready for school. Nova was brushing Ari's curls. Kai was practicing Dutch phrases and giggling when he got them wrong. Scarlett smiled. She didn't need marble countertops or status. She had this, and this was real. At the university, Scarlett quickly became known for her discipline. She wasn't the loudest in meetings, but her research spoke louder than any speech. The Elise protocol, once a scattered theory born between feedings, was now a fully formed model, supported by trial cases, neural imaging data, and real-time developmental outcomes. Professors began citing her. Students started asking for mentorship. And slowly, Scarlett's name found its way onto panels, forums, and symposium invites. Not as Daniel Smith's former partner, not as the woman behind Neuronexus, but as Dr. Scarlett Banks. She hadn't just reinvented herself. She had finally been restored. In the evenings, after class and lab work, she walked the canals with the kids. They fed ducks, picked tulips, read stories in 3 languages. They weren't just adapting, they were thriving. Ari started writing poetry in his journal. Nova joined a coding group. Kai became friends with a boy who taught him how to ride without training wheels. One night, Nova asked, "Why did we leave America?" Scarlett thought for a moment. "Because Mommy needed to remember who she was," she answered. Nova blinked. "Did you forget?" "No, baby," she said, kissing her daughter's forehead. "But someone else tried to make me." Back at the lab, Elias and Scarlett continued working closely. Their bond deepened, not in dramatic declarations, but in the details. He remembered how she took her coffee. She noticed how he always tapped his pen when deep in thought. They challenged each other intellectually, respected boundaries, and never assumed access. One afternoon, while reviewing case notes, Elias asked, "What's your biggest fear?" Scarlett didn't hesitate. "Waking up in someone else's life again." He nodded, then said, "My fear is not recognizing myself in mine." Their eyes met. No follow-up needed. Some connections live in quiet understanding. On their next night together, there was no hesitation. Scarlett arrived at Elias's apartment wearing a long cream sweater over leggings. No makeup, no pretense. He opened the door with a smile and didn't say a word. He just stepped aside and let her in. That night was different. Still slow, still tender, but full of certainty. They kissed like people who had learned not to waste time. They touched like explorers, curious, reverent. Scarlett climbed onto him in the soft candlelight, her hands pressed against his chest. "This is my body," she whispered. "And I'm not giving it away. I'm choosing where it belongs." Elias didn't try to control her pace. He followed her lead, moving with her like a man honoring the moment. Their breaths tangled, their skin met without performance. No rush, no roles, just truth. Later, lying tangled together, Elias whispered, "You're not the same woman I met." Scarlett turned to him. "No, I'm not." She paused. "And I never want to be her again." At the lab the next day, a courier delivered a sleek envelope to Scarlett's desk. Inside, an invitation to the European Pediatric Summit. Not as an attendee, as a keynote speaker. She would be presenting the Elise protocol to the world. Her hands shook, but not with nerves, with power. She walked to the observation room, where the triplets were participating in a cognitive puzzle session. Watching them solve, stumble, and succeed reminded her why she started this work. They weren't just her children. They were her foundation, her reason. Back at home, she found a small note taped to the fridge. It was written in Ari's careful print. "Mommy, I'm proud of your brain." Scarlett sat at the kitchen table and cried. Not from sadness, from arrival. The night before the summit, Elias offered to take the kids for ice cream. Scarlett almost said no, but then she smiled. "Thank you." "You're ready," he said. "They're going to listen, really listen." Scarlett nodded. "That's the part that scares me." He stepped closer. "It shouldn't. The world's been missing your voice." The next day, she stood behind the podium, nerves pounding quietly beneath her calm. Her slides lit the auditorium behind her. The room was full. Scientists, journalists, clinicians. But she focused on the three small faces in the front row: Nova, Ari, Kai. Scarlett adjusted the mic, took a breath, and began. She didn't speak with performance. She spoke with clarity, with lived experience, with a depth that came not from textbooks, but from years of watching children grow with their mother beside them, not over them. By the end of her talk, the room was still. Then came the applause. Long, standing. Scarlett didn't cry. She didn't bow. She just looked at her kids and smiled. Because this moment, it belonged to them too. Elias never asked for attention. He didn't need the spotlight. He didn't perform for praise or pose for admiration. That's what startled Scarlett at first. His steadiness. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't poetic. It was constant. And after years of emotional tightropes, Scarlett found constancy more seductive than charm. They worked in parallel. Scarlett's research leaned into neuroplasticity and early stimulation. Elias focused on inherited trauma markers and emotional response patterns in infants. Their fields overlapped in subtle ways. Their lives, even more so. Elias respected her boundaries without being told. He never asked her to change her schedule. He never tried to be the triplets' father. But he showed up, picked them up when Scarlett was buried in grant deadlines, waited patiently when dinner ran long, sat through Kai's puppet shows with a straight face and Nova's long explanations of outer space like they were gospel. Scarlett watched all of it, quietly, not because she was waiting for him to fail, but because she still didn't fully believe love could exist without obligation attached. One Friday night, Scarlett arrived home late. She had been teaching a workshop on data interpretation. The kids were already in pajamas. The kitchen was clean. A bowl of leftover pasta sat covered on the counter. Elias was reading on the couch, glasses slipping down his nose. She stood there for a moment, just watching. No performance, no announcement, just presence. And somehow, that hit deeper than any grand gesture ever could. Later that night, they lay together in bed. Scarlett traced the lines of Elias's forearm. "Why are you still here?" she asked softly. He didn't pretend not to understand. He just turned to her and said, "Because I want to be." She nodded. But her voice came again, quieter. "What if I fail?" "You won't," he said. "But even if you did, I'd still be here." Scarlett's throat tightened. No one had ever said that to her before, not without a condition attached. Over time, Elias began integrating more naturally into her life, not as a replacement, not as a rescuer, but as a witness. He offered solutions without undermining her. He challenged her ideas without challenging her authority. He never tried to lead her work. He walked beside it. The children noticed too. Ari started asking Elias questions during dinner. Nova began slipping her artwork into his satchel for review. Kai once announced, "You're good at hugs," before wrapping his arms around Elias' waist and then walking away like it was the most normal thing in the world. Scarlett said nothing, but her heart logged every moment. They weren't accidents. They were evidence. At the university, their partnership flourished. Together, they co-led a multidisciplinary research initiative exploring how genetic trauma markers respond to active cognitive reprogramming in early development. Scarlett headed the neurology arm. Elias managed the epigenetic response analysis. Their papers were balanced, their citations sharp, and neither of them needed to dominate the headline. It was the first time in her professional life Scarlett felt equal, not tolerated, not used, equal. After presenting at a regional medical conference, they walked along the canal in silence. The air was cold. Elias offered his scarf. Scarlett accepted it. They didn't hold hands. They didn't need to. Everything between them was spoken already. But halfway across the bridge, Scarlett paused. "I never asked you what you want," she said. "From this..." Elias turned toward her. "You..." She blinked. "But I come with baggage." He raised an eyebrow. "They're not baggage. They're your people. But my life is chaotic. I like quiet. Chaos balances me." She swallowed. "And the past..." He took a step closer. She didn't kiss him then. She didn't need to. She already knew. This was a man who saw her not as a project or prize, but as a partner. And that was everything. Later that evening, as they folded laundry together, an act as mundane as breathing, Elias looked over and said, "You don't realize it yet, but you're building a legacy. One day the world will trace its steps back to this moment. To you, right here. Scarlett didn't respond right away. Then she said, "It's hard to believe in legacies when you've spent years cleaning up someone else's." "Exactly," he said. "That's why yours will matter more." Their next night together wasn't dramatic. It was slow, easy, real. They cooked together, burned the rice, laughed about it. He kissed her in the hallway. She pulled him toward the bedroom. And there, in the hush between footsteps and whispers, they became something solid. Not fantasy, not rescue. Just two people choosing each other, freely. Scarlett didn't knock. She didn't text ahead. She didn't hesitate. She just showed up at Elias's apartment with her heart thudding in her chest and her nerves stripped bare. It had been a long week. Lectures, meetings, field tests, parent-teacher conferences. But none of that was the reason she was standing outside his door with nothing but quiet conviction and the ache of anticipation tucked beneath her coat. He opened the door in a soft navy tee and gray sweats, barefoot, eyes warm. He didn't say anything. Neither did she. Not yet. She stepped inside. He closed the door. The rain began outside, tapping lightly against the windows like the universe whispering that this moment had arrived on time. Scarlett pulled off her coat slowly, revealing a long-fitted dress, thin straps, resting over her shoulders, the fabric clinging softly to her curves. She hadn't dressed for seduction. She had dressed for remembrance. She needed to remember what it felt like to be desired without condition. To be touched, not because it was earned, but because it was wanted. Elias stepped toward her, cautious, as though approaching a flame he didn't want to startle. She reached for his hand and placed it flat against her waist. "I don't want to be careful tonight," she said, voice low. His fingers curled gently into the fabric of her dress. "Then tell me what you want." She slid his hand lower. "I want you to take your time, but not hold back." He kissed her slowly at first, lips soft and exploratory, tasting her as if she were a language he wanted to master, not rush. Scarlett parted her mouth for him, letting him in, not with hesitation but with certainty. She led him to the couch. They sank into it, tangled in each other, their bodies finding rhythm before clothes even came off. His hands were everywhere, shoulders, hips, the back of her thighs, but nowhere rushed, nowhere forceful, just firm, present. When he kissed the hollow of her throat, she sighed, long and low, as though the pressure in her lungs had finally broken free. He eased the straps of her dress down with reverence, exposing her slowly, like unwrapping something sacred. Her skin responded instantly. She felt heat rise from the center of her belly outward, blooming across her chest, neck, jaw. Elias leaned back just to look at her. "You are—" he began. She stopped him with a kiss. "No metaphors," she whispered against his lips. "Just keep going." He obeyed. He stood, lifted her in his arms, and carried her to the bedroom without ceremony. No stunts, no words, just breath and need. Scarlett didn't resist. She wanted to be carried. She wanted to be wanted. The bed was warm from the radiator, soft beneath her back. Elias stood over her, pulling his shirt off slowly, then sliding down his sweats. She watched him with open hunger. The definition of his chest, the way his muscles moved with control, his thighs, strong and steady. He was the kind of man who didn't just take his time. He honored it. When he climbed onto the bed, hovering over her, their eyes locked again. Scarlett reached up, brushed a thumb along his lower lip. "I've never done this without performing," she whispered. "Not like this." He kissed her palm. "Then don't perform." She nodded. "And let go." He kissed her again, deeper now, slower. His mouth moved down her chest, his tongue tracing every inch he uncovered. She arched beneath him, hands in his hair, her breath breaking into half-formed moans. His hands explored her hips, her inner thighs, caressing with care and purpose. When he finally reached the center of her heat, he didn't rush. He teased, tasted, took. Scarlett's head rolled back, a soft cry escaping her throat, legs trembling under his tongue. She had never felt so fully consumed, so seen, so undone. Elias moved up, kissing a trail along her stomach, her ribs, the curve of her jaw. She pulled him down by the back of the neck. "I need you inside me," she whispered, voice thick with desperation. "Now." He entered her slowly. One deep stroke. Scarlett gasped, not from pain, but from the shocking intimacy of it, from the way he filled her, not just physically, but with something deeper, something real. Her hands clutched his back, nails pressing into his skin as he began to move. Not fast, but deep, measured, like he was answering every question her body had ever been too afraid to ask. They moved together like memory and melody, raw and rhythmic. Scarlett's moans grew louder, her body trembling, legs tightening around his waist. She clung to him, kissed him, whispered things she didn't know she'd been holding in for years. Harder, she breathed. Don't hold me like I'll break. Elias responded with a groan, hips driving deeper, hands gripping her. Thighs, his pace quickening just enough to push her over the edge. Her climax hit like a flood, sudden, hot, overwhelming. She cried out, tears pricking her eyes, chest heaving as the wave rolled through her, and even then, he didn't stop. He slowed, held her, kissed her through it. She felt every heartbeat in her chest and every tremble in her limbs. She reached for him again. I want more, she whispered, voice raw. You have all of me, he said. Then he kissed her again and rolled onto his back, pulling her on top. Scarlett straddled him, hair wild, skin glowing with sweat and satisfaction. She looked down at him and smiled, truly smiled. Then she sank down, taking him in again, slow, inch by inch. Elias groaned beneath her, his hands holding her hips, letting her lead this time. Scarlett moved with purpose, riding him with a mix of power and surrender. Her body rocked in waves, her moans filling the room like a song only he could hear. He watched her the whole time, never looked away. Even when he came, it was with her name in his mouth and her body wrapped tight around his. They collapsed into each other, breathless, wrapped in sweat and softness. Scarlett buried her face in his chest. Elias kissed the top of her head. Neither of them spoke for a long while. Eventually, she whispered, I didn't know it could feel like that. Elias stroked her back. You've never been with someone who knew how to see you first. She closed her eyes. Let the warmth settle. Let herself rest. Not as an escape, but as a woman finally choosing ease. It began with an email. Scarlett was in the lab, finalizing her team's first external trial report for the Elise protocol, when the subject line hit her inbox like a strike of static, urgent, allegations of plagiarism. At first, she thought it was spam, another scare tactic from online trolls. But when she opened it, her stomach dropped. The message came from the university's ethics committee. A formal inquiry had been opened into claims that Scarlett's research bore significant resemblance to a white paper published by Genetics Inc. in 2017. Attached, a comparison document. Sections of her work highlighted alongside segments of the genetics paper. A sick familiarity crawled up her spine. Genetics, Daniel's family's company. Of course. Scarlett closed her laptop, sat still. Her thoughts didn't race. They sharpened. She reached for her phone, scrolled through her archive of lab notes, timestamps, audio recordings, and digital drafts. She had built the Elise protocol from scratch. Every theory, every application. And she had been developing the initial model back in 2015, years before Daniel ever entered her life, let alone before she'd ever heard of genetics. She didn't panic. She documented. She prepared. Because if they thought she would shrink again, they had clearly forgotten what happened when a woman like her remembered who she was. Later that day, a printed copy of the accusation circulated among department heads. Gossip moved fast in academic circles, and faster in elite institutions threatened by disruption. Scarlett walked through the corridors like a storm in stillness. She didn't engage. She didn't react. She simply walked taller. Let them talk. She had data. Elias found her that night standing on the balcony, the wind sweeping through her curls, her shoulders squared like armor. They're coming for you because you're winning, he said softly. She didn't answer right away. Then, they're coming for me because I stopped hiding behind someone else's success. Elias stepped beside her. What do you need? Scarlett turned toward him, eyes clear, space, quiet, and no one telling me to soften this. He nodded. Done. The hearing was scheduled for Friday. She was given 3 days to compile a defense. While most people would have scrambled, Scarlett opened her notebook and got to work. Every chart, every napkin scribble, every time-stamped audio note she'd recorded over the years, narrating neural behavior, while folding laundry or driving the kids to playgroup, became her arsenal. She built her timeline like an architect builds a tower, detail by detail. truth by truth, unshakable. On the day of the hearing, she dressed in a simple black blouse, her curls pinned back, no makeup except for a soft berry lipstick. She didn't come to impress. She came to stand. The room was full, 40 researchers, senior faculty, a few members of the ethics board, and a handful of reporters waiting outside. Scarlett took her seat at the front. She didn't smile. She didn't blink. The opening statement was clinical, a monotone review of the claim, referencing potential overlap with a genetics document authored by a research assistant 2 years after Scarlett's initial notes had been logged. They asked her if she had a statement. She stood, opened her file, and began. What followed wasn't a defense, it was a dismantling. With clear dates, methodical references, and a calm voice, she walked them through her process, from the earliest napkin diagram, to her first neural map, to her children's speech progressions that had inspired parts of the sensory repair model. She played an audio clip from 2015, her own voice, recorded in her tiny apartment while feeding Ari, explaining how mirror neuron disruption might be rerouted through micro-reward stimulation. Some in the room shifted. One professor leaned forward. Another blinked rapidly. She showed them digital timestamps, scans of journals, archived email drafts, and finally she concluded, "My work wasn't born in a boardroom. It was built in a nursery, a kitchen, a quiet corner of a life no one thought was valuable enough to document. But I documented it, because I knew one day this moment would come." Then she sat and waited. There was a long silence. Then someone stood. Dr. Wenders, a senior neurologist known for his sharp skepticism. He looked at Scarlett, then at the panel, and said, "Miss Scarlett, I owe you an apology." Applause didn't come fast. It came slow, rising like a tide, then louder, then all at once. Scarlett didn't bow. She didn't smile. She nodded once. Outside, reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed. She ignored all of it. Elias was waiting near the steps. She walked straight to him. He didn't speak. He just opened the car door. She slid in, exhaled, closed her eyes. Later, in their quiet apartment, he handed her a glass of water. Scarlett took it, then looked at him. "I didn't realize how much I needed to say all that out loud." "You didn't speak for them," Elias replied. "You spoke for yourself." She nodded and whispered, "Finally." 3 days after the hearing, the university issued a formal statement. It was short, unapologetic, clinical. Dr. Scarlett Banks has been cleared of all allegations. The research in question is her original work, developed independently and prior to any reference materials cited. The university regrets the inquiry and stands by her continued academic integrity. Scarlett read it once, then closed the email. It was not justice. It was bureaucracy, but it was done. The real redemption didn't come from the institution. It came from the ripple. Within 24 hours, the international neuroscience community started talking. A prominent journal released an op-ed titled, "How Academia Almost Erased One of the Brightest Voices in Pediatric Cognitive Research." Scarlett's inbox flooded with invitations, podcasts, panels, collaborations. Professors she once admired from afar now addressed her with respect, not because she demanded it, because she had earned it. Again, her keynote at the European Pediatric Summit was moved from a breakout room to the main stage. She didn't change her presentation. She didn't add slides. She just changed her tone. She stood behind the podium, the triplets seated front row with Elias, and said, "I used to think my ideas weren't valid until someone else confirmed them, but now I understand. Truth doesn't wait for permission, and neither should the people who carry it." Her words weren't met with just applause. They were met with action. 2 universities reached out immediately. One offered her a fellowship to lead a cognitive innovation division. The other offered her a permanent chair. Later that night, she and Elias walked the canals in silence. She wasn't floating. She was grounded. Scarlett had been lifted before, by Daniel, by promises, by appearances. This was different. This was earned from the marrow. At home, Ari gave her a handmade award cut from cardboard and glitter glue. Nova read her a poem she'd written about mommy's brain-saving kids. Kai, not to be outdone, declared he was building a superhero based on her work. Scarlett listened, smiled, and felt full, not with pride, with peace. The next week, she was asked to give a televised interview. She almost declined, not out of fear, but because she didn't want to dilute her story into a soundbite. Elias said, "Tell them the truth, the real one, not the shiny one." She agreed. The interview aired on a Wednesday night. Scarlett wore a soft burgundy blouse, no jewelry, and her hair down in curls. The host asked, "How did it feel, being accused of stealing your own work?" Scarlett didn't flinch. "I wasn't shocked. I was expected to stay quiet, to vanish. But I've done that before. This time I knew better." "And what would you say to women who've given their best ideas to someone else?" Scarlett leaned forward slightly. "Take them back." The clip went viral, not because it was dramatic, but because it was honest. Comment sections filled with stories from women across industries, scientists, nurses, artists, teachers, people who had been made to feel small while carrying things too big for credit to cover. One night she received a handwritten letter from a mother in Brazil. Her child had been part of an early trial using Scarlett's model. The mother wrote, "He speaks now. He says, 'Mama, you changed my life, and you don't even know my name.'" Scarlett cried reading it, not because she wanted thanks, but because the work was finally touching the people it was meant for, directly, without filters. She framed the letter, not beside her degrees, beside the triplets' first drawings, because that's what legacy looked like, not plaques. Impact. She began speaking to younger researchers, first general students, single mothers. Every seminar ended the same way. "Your name matters. Put it on your work, say it out loud, don't let them forget it." And they didn't. Her sessions began to fill beyond capacity. She started mentoring full-time. The Horizon Institute, one of Europe's most prestigious neurological bodies, invited her to head its pediatric cognition wing. Full autonomy, full recognition, full control. She accepted, not because she needed a title, but because she had earned the authority to say yes on her own terms. Elias surprised her with a small dinner that night. Just him, the triplets, and a homemade cake with icing that read, "Chief of Brains and Bravery." They laughed until Kai got frosting in his curls. Scarlett stood in that candlelit kitchen, watching her life glow. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't famous. It was real. And hers. The room was dim, lit only by the amber glow of a lamp in the far corner. Rain pattered gently against the window pane, a quiet rhythm in the background. As Scarlett stepped out of the bathroom, towel drying her hair, Elias sat on the bed, legs stretched out, reading one of her old research drafts she'd left open on the desk. "You rewrote the whole second phase," he said, glancing up. "It's stronger, sharper." Scarlett tossed the towel over the chair and walked toward him in nothing but an oversized t-shirt that hung mid-thigh. She shrugged. "I needed it to reflect where I am now." He looked at her a beat longer, then closed the folder and set it aside. "So where are you now?" Scarlett crawled onto the bed, straddling his legs without hesitation. "Here," she said, her voice low. "With you." Wanting more, he leaned up, kissed her gently at first, then deeper. Scarlett grabbed the hem of her shirt and pulled it over her head, dropping it to the side without breaking eye contact. She wasn't hesitant, not anymore. Her body was no longer a battleground or a performance. It was hers, and she was choosing this moment, choosing him. Elias sat back slightly, his hands settling on her waist. His eyes scanned her with a look that wasn't possessive. It was appreciative, almost reverent. "You look like power," he whispered. "I feel like it," she replied, guiding his hands lower. Their mouths met again, this time with heat, the kind of heat that didn't demand. It invited. He kissed her throat, her collarbone, the space between her breasts, making her shiver with each press of his lips. She moaned softly, rocking against him, hands threading through his hair as her need deepened. She pushed him back against the pillows, climbed over him fully, and took her time, not to tease, but to savor. Scarlett kissed her way down his chest, her fingers trailing lightly over his skin, feeling every muscle shift beneath her. When he groaned, low and deep, she smiled. She loved that sound. She loved knowing she had caused it. Elias sat up, cupping her face with both hands. "You're not who you used to be." "No," she breathed. "I'm more." Then she kissed him again, harder, wetter, hungrier. He laid her down gently and slipped between her legs, his mouth on her inner thigh, his breath teasing her in all the right ways. Her hands fisted the sheets. "Elias," she gasped. He looked up, smiling, Tell me what you want." Scarlet met his eyes. Everything. He gave it to her. His tongue was skilled, steady, relentless. She came fast, arching off the mattress with a cry that echoed against the walls. But he didn't stop. He kept going, drawing every aftershock from her body until she was, trembling beneath him, her skin flushed and glistening with heat. When he finally moved up and entered her, it felt like the last piece of something falling into place. Scarlet gasped again, not because it hurt, but because it felt like coming home. They moved together in sync, her legs wrapped tight around his waist, her nails digging into his back as he drove deeper. Elias kissed her neck, whispered her name like it was a vow. Her body clung to his like it had found its match. Not someone to worship, not someone to serve, but someone to burn with. Scarlet rolled on top again, her rhythm confident, her body wild. She rode him like she had nothing to prove, only everything to feel. Elias gripped her hips, met her every movement with groans that fueled her. They didn't chase climax. They chased connection. When they came together, it was loud, raw, and honest. No holding back, no hiding. Just two bodies, two minds, two hearts, aligned. Afterward, Scarlet lay with her head on his chest, their breaths slowing, the room humming with a different kind of quiet. The kind that comes when you finally let yourself be seen, not just in love. She tilted her head up. I used to think passion had to be controlled, that it was dangerous. Elias brushed his fingers through her curls, and now? She kissed his jaw. Now I know, it's the fire that kept me alive. Scarlet stood in front of the mirror, wrapped in a bedsheet, watching the faint light of morning pour across her shoulders. The room still smelled of him, Elias, and of her, the skin-warm scent of intimacy, of comfort without compromise. She turned, her bare back catching the golden haze. There was a softness in her eyes now, but no hesitation. This wasn't about seduction. This was reclamation. Elias stirred behind her, the sheets rustling. His voice, still sleep-laced, drifted through the quiet. "You okay?" She glanced over her shoulder. "I've never felt more like myself." He sat up, tousled and shirtless, watching her from across the room with a gaze that asked nothing, but gave everything. Scarlet dropped the sheet, let it fall, and stood there, completely exposed. She didn't cover her scars. She didn't flinch from the stretch marks across her hips or the fullness in her thighs. Instead, she walked to him slowly. Elias's eyes never wavered. When she reached the bed, she climbed over him, straddling his waist. Her hands cupped his jaw. And then she said, clear and deliberate, "This is my body." Elias's hands settled gently on her thighs. "Yes, and I've carried life with it." He nodded. "I know. I've buried my dreams inside it. And now you're unearthing them." She leaned in until their lips nearly touched. "I used to give it away to be wanted. Now I give it because I choose." His breath caught. "I don't need to be saved," she added. "I need to be met." Elias's grip on her thighs tightened slightly. "Then let me meet you," he said. And he did. Their kiss was slow but deep, filled with knowing. Scarlet rocked her hips forward, guiding him inside her, both of them gasping softly at the connection. There was no rush, no choreography, only presence. Her fingers tangled in his curls as she moved, slow, deliberate circles, each roll of her hips a declaration. His hands traveled up her spine, grounding her, matching her rhythm. She closed her eyes, head tipping back as pleasure rolled through her in waves, her body vibrating with each crest. She leaned down, pressed her forehead to his. "This isn't about you," she whispered. "This is about me finally choosing me." He kissed her cheek. "I've never wanted anything more." She sat up again, riding him now with power, slow, rolling, raw. Her breath turned ragged, thighs trembling as she chased release not as a gift, but as her right. Elias groaned beneath her, eyes glazed with hunger. But he didn't take control. He followed her lead. Scarlet's hands rested on his chest, nails digging in slightly as she pushed herself harder, faster. Her climax built slow, steady, coiling tight in her belly, then erupting, like a storm as she cried out, body pulsing in waves over him. Elias held her through it, waited, let her come down. When her breathing calmed, he flipped them gently, laying her back with care. And then he moved inside her again, this time leading but still asking, still listening. Scarlet welcomed it, met him thrust for thrust. She wrapped her legs around his back, pulling him deeper, her body opening with complete abandon. They moved together in that rhythm, hot, soaked, breathless, until they both broke, together, clinging, collapsing, connected. After, Scarlett lay in his arms, the sheets twisted around their legs. Her skin still tingled, her muscles deliciously sore, but more than that, she felt anchored, not to a man, to herself. Elias stroked her arm lazily. "I love watching you take what you want." Scarlett turned toward him. "I used to think I had to earn pleasure," she said. "Now I know it's mine to claim." He kissed her shoulder. "Claim it again." She laughed, soft and low, then whispered, "I think I will." The article hit the science forums at 7:12 a.m. From motherhood to mind maps, how Dr. Scarlett Smith is rewiring the future of pediatric cognition. Scarlett read it over coffee, barefoot in her kitchen, one hand flipping a pancake for Kai while the other scrolled through the article on her tablet. They got it right, not because they praised her credentials, but because they named her fully, clearly, without parentheses, Dr. Scarlett Smith. The byline quoted one of her most recent lectures. "We talk about early cognition like it begins at birth, but it begins in the womb, where the first neurons don't just form a system, they form a story. My work is about helping children reclaim that story before the world overwrites it." That line was now trending across academic Twitter. Professors, child psychologists, and advocacy groups were all reposting. But Scarlett didn't gloat. She didn't screenshot it. She didn't send it to Daniel. She didn't need to. Later that morning, she walked into the Horizon Institute to find a bouquet of yellow tulips on her desk. No card, but she knew who sent them. Elias never attached his name to gestures. He didn't need credit to love her. In the weeks that followed, her calendar filled. Invitations, keynotes, interviews, universities requesting curriculum frameworks based on the Elise Protocol. Scarlett declined half of them, not to be difficult, but to protect her time. She wasn't interested in burning out for applause. Her work wasn't a victory lap. It was a foundation. One Thursday afternoon, she entered a classroom of first-year grad students, diverse, eager, wide-eyed, and wrote on the whiteboard, "Intelligence is not linear. Neither is healing." She taught them how to listen to patterns in child speech that others ignored. She assigned them to observe, not just through data, but through empathy. And when one of the students asked her what she considered her biggest accomplishment, she didn't hesitate. "Not quitting," she said. "Not when I was invisible. Not when I was erased. Not even when I was bought off." The room went silent. Then someone clapped. And then all of them did. That evening, Scarlett hosted a small celebration at home. Just a few colleagues. The Triplets helped decorate with hand-drawn signs and paper garlands. Nova made place cards. Ari recited a toast he'd written on his own. Kai? He ate all the cake frosting before dinner. Scarlett stood in the middle of her modest apartment, laughter echoing, music playing low, and felt it. A rival, not as someone's woman, not as someone's assistant, but as herself, a leader, a scholar, a mother, and finally, a woman at peace. Elias pulled her into the hallway as the guests laughed in the other room. He held up a folded newspaper. The headline read, "The future of neuroscience has a new face, and it's not a man's." Scarlett smiled, arching an eyebrow. They finally caught up. He tucked a paper into her hand. "You've already passed them." Then he kissed her. Slow, firm, familiar. Scarlett let herself melt into it, just for a moment, because celebration wasn't her usual rhythm. But tonight, she allowed it. She sat with the Triplets on the floor that night, brushing Nova's curls, listening to Kai make up bedtime songs while Ari reread a science comic aloud. When they finally fell asleep, Scarlett tiptoed to her room, opened her laptop, and drafted a new letter. This one wasn't to a funder or a university. It was to herself. "Dear Scarlett, this is not the beginning. You've already begun. This is the moment you realize you no longer need anyone to hand you the pen. You've had it all along. Write the future now, with your name in bold." Daniel first saw the headline during a quarterly shareholders meeting. He had just wrapped up a presentation on Neuronexus's international expansion when his assistant slid a tablet in front of him. At the top of the screen, from stay-at-home to scientific savior, how Dr. Scarlett Smith is redefining early brain development. Beneath the headline was a photo, Scarlett, standing on stage at the European Pediatric Summit, her curls glowing under soft light, her voice mid-sentence, her children seated proudly in the front row. She wasn't behind anyone. She wasn't part of someone else's story. She was the story. Daniel's jaw tightened. The meeting moved on, voices blurring as investors discussed funding timelines. But he didn't hear them. He kept staring at the screen, kept seeing her, the woman he once asked to shrink herself, the mother of his children, the partner he paid to disappear. Later, in his office, Daniel locked the door and pulled up the full broadcast of her keynote. He watched it twice. The first time, in silence. The second, with his jaw clenched and his hand pressed to his lips. She spoke clearly, boldly, with authority he never let her display when they were together. She used terminology they once brainstormed over late-night takeout, ideas she'd scribbled on receipts while balancing a baby in one arm and a whiteboard marker in the other. He remembered those nights. He remembered her brilliance. And he remembered not giving it air. He sent her a message. Short, no subject line. I saw the article. Her reply came hours later, I figured. He stared at the blinking cursor, then typed again. I read about Elias. No reply this time. He waited. 30 minutes. Then, an hour. Finally, another message from her. Did you ever think I'd just stay quiet forever? Daniel leaned back in his chair. He hadn't thought about it that way. Not then. He hadn't really thought about what staying quiet cost her. He typed, Did you ever love me? The response didn't come for 15 minutes. When it did, it was one line. I did. But I also loved who I could have become, and you made me choose. He sat there, staring at the words. Not angry, not defensive, just hollow, because he knew she was right. His mother called later that evening. You've seen the press, haven't you? She asked. I have. She's using the Smith name in her publications. Daniel didn't respond. We might need to revisit that agreement, she pressed. She didn't sign anything about that. She's gaining influence, public sympathy. It could become inconvenient. Daniel stared out the window. She's not our problem anymore. His mother huffed. She's not a threat. But her story makes us look ungrateful. Daniel hung up without another word. He opened Scarlett's LinkedIn profile later that night. Her credentials had doubled. New grants, published research, media features. In every photo she looked alive. Not polished, not posed, just seen. He clicked away, then poured a drink, not to forget her, to face what he'd thrown away. The next morning, a journalist reached out for comment. They were working on a feature about Scarlett's transition from anonymous partner to global leader. Daniel declined. There was nothing he could say that wouldn't feel like an apology dressed as explanation. And she didn't need either from him anymore. Scarlett received his last message 2 days later. I offered you freedom. She stared at the screen for a long time, then typed back, No, you offered me money to disappear, and I used it to return to myself. She sent it, blocked the thread, and moved on. She didn't feel triumphant. She didn't want revenge. She just wanted peace. And that's exactly what she had now. Scarlett hadn't expected the invitation. Not from Daniel. Not after everything. Not after silence. It came in a white envelope, hand-delivered to her office at the Horizon Institute. No return address, just her name in embossed silver, Dr. Scarlett Smith. Inside was a single sheet. The Smith Family Foundation requests your presence at the annual gala for child neuroadvancement as both honoree and guest speaker, in recognition of your contributions to the Elise Protocol and cognitive reprogramming models for early trauma. Below it was Daniel's signature. Scarlett blinked, then laughed. Elias read the invitation over her shoulder that evening. Well, that's not a trap at all, he joked. Scarlett rolled her eyes. They don't have a patent on irony. Are you going? She considered. I don't need their platform anymore. He nodded. But they need your name on theirs. Scarlett thought about it for days. Not because she was unsure, but because she needed clarity on one thing. Would attending this gala be a performance? Or would it be a message? The answer came from Ari. He'd been working on a scientist costume for school career day, taping a pretend badge to his chest that read, Future me, like Mommy, but taller. Scarlett knelt down and fixed the badge. And in that moment, she knew. This wasn't about Daniel, or the Smiths. This was about her children, seeing what it looked like to walk into a room you once exited in shame and own it. The night of the gala, the ballroom glittered in gold and steel. Atlanta's elite mingled over champagne and curated platitudes. But when Scarlett entered, everything hushed. Her dress was midnight blue, sleeveless, with a plunging neckline and a high slit, powerful, elegant, unapologetically bold. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek twist. Her heels clicked like punctuation, and on her arm was Nova, not Elias, not an escort, her daughter. The symbolism wasn't accidental. Daniel's mother spotted her first. The older woman's expression faltered. She approached slowly. "You look radiant," she said, like it hurt to admit. Scarlett smiled politely. Funny what visibility does. A pause. Then, "Daniel speaks of you often." Scarlett's eyes didn't flinch. "I don't." Daniel found her near the silent auction. "Scarlett." She turned. He looked older. Still powerful. Still polished. But different. Less certain. "Thank you for coming," he said. "You needed me here," she replied simply. He nodded. I didn't come for you," she added. "I know." He looked at Nova beside her and softened. "She looks just like you." Scarlett adjusted her daughter's sleeve. "She looks like herself, just the way I'm teaching her to." The award presentation was brief. Scarlett stood on stage, her name echoing across the speakers. She took the mic, glanced across the sea of powerful people who once erased her. Then she began. "Years ago, I sat in this very room as a +1. My name wasn't in the program. My opinions weren't on panels. I was background. Today, I'm here as a mother, a neuroscientist, and a woman who refused to be defined by absence. I don't accept this honor as validation. I accept it as confirmation that you can disappear from their story and come back as the author of your own." The applause was thunderous, but Scarlett didn't smile for the room. She smiled for Nova, who was watching, learning, becoming. Later, Daniel approached once more. "I have a proposal," he said. She sighed. "Daniel, no strings, no deals, just a contribution." He handed her a folded document. The title read, "Endowment Proposal. The Scarlett Elise Fund for Early Neuroresilience, $2.5 million. No oversight. Full creative control." Scarlett stared at it. He added softly, "This isn't guilt. It's gratitude." She met his gaze. "This changes nothing between us," she said. "I know." She looked down at the document again, and then she smiled, not out of shock, but out of clarity. "I'll accept it," she said. "But not from you." He blinked. "You'll sign it over to the Institute. My name stays, but the power moves through legacy, not ego." He nodded. "I can live with that." Scarlett extended her hand. They shook, not as lovers, not even as friends, but as people who understood the value of letting go. It was raining when Scarlett returned home from the gala. Not the kind of rain that drenched you, the kind that whispered. She stepped out of the car barefoot, heels in one hand, hair damp from the mist. Nova was asleep in the back seat, her head tilted to one side, clutching the event brochure like it was a storybook. Scarlett carried her daughter upstairs, tucked her in, kissed her cheek, and lingered for a moment, watching her breathe. She hadn't just shown up at that gala. She had rewritten her own ending. Elias was already in the kitchen, his sleeves rolled up, chopping ginger. The scent of citrus and spice danced in the air. He didn't ask how the night went. He didn't need to. He slid a mug of hot tea toward her without a word and kissed her temple. Scarlett didn't speak either. She just leaned into him. Later, after the rain settled and the city quieted beneath its soft midnight, they lay in bed, wrapped in nothing but sheets and silence. No urgency, no heat demanding attention. Just two bodies, warm and close. She rested her cheek against his chest, fingers tracing the lines of his collarbone. Elias whispered, "You did something brave tonight." Scarlett nodded. It didn't feel brave. It felt necessary. "That's the most honest kind of courage," he murmured. She smiled into his skin. For a long time, neither of them said anything. They just breathed in rhythm. Scarlett had known desire before. She'd known heat, lust, hunger. But this was something else entirely. She raised her head and looked into his eyes. "I used to think love was rescue," she said. Elias's brow softened. "Someone to pull me out when I was drowning. Someone to shield me." He waited. "And then I realized," she continued, I don't need saving. I needed space, safety, room to remember who I was before the world told me what to become. He brushed a curl from her forehead. And now? Scarlett's eyes didn't waver. Now I know love isn't about escape. It's about choosing someone who walks beside you, even when the road's already yours. Elias kissed her, slow, intentional. Not a spark, a flame, a gentle burn that asked for nothing and offered everything. They didn't rush. He undressed her, as if each layer was a chapter he respected. She returned the touch with reverence, not passion as performance, but as presence, as proof of trust, of choice. The intimacy that followed was quiet. No moans echoing into the night, just soft gasps. Tender laughter, hands that memorized, not conquered, bodies that listened. Afterward, Scarlett lay on her back, his arm curled beneath her. She stared at the ceiling, the softness of his breath brushing her shoulder. "Do you ever feel like we skipped the chaos?" she asked. Elias chuckled. "You've lived enough of that for both of us." She turned to him. "I thought I needed someone who would fight for me, break down doors, burn things to the ground. And instead, you got a man who folds your laundry and doesn't interrupt your thoughts." Scarlett laughed, genuine and full. "Yes," she whispered. "Exactly that." They made love again in the early hours, this time with more heat, more hands, more mouth. But even then, it wasn't possession. It was alignment, not bodies fitting, but souls. In the silence that followed, Scarlett whispered into the dark, "I think I'm finally free." Elias kissed her knuckles. "You always were. You just stopped apologizing for it." The next morning, sunlight spilled across the room. Scarlett woke to the sound of Ari arguing with Kai about cereal. She pulled on a robe and padded into the kitchen, hair messy, face bare. Elias was flipping pancakes again. Nova was humming at the table, drawing with a red crayon. The world didn't need to be perfect. It just needed to be true. And this was hers. That afternoon, Scarlett wrote a new letter, not to Daniel, not to the Institute, to herself. Again. But this time, it was shorter. "Dear me, you are no longer surviving. You are choosing. And love, real love, doesn't ask you to disappear. It sees you. And stays." Hello, family. Have you ever realized love wasn't rescue, but recognition? Drop a comment if you're learning to love without losing yourself. And if you're still here, still watching, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button and tap on the notification bell so you don't miss a single moment. They came with a new offer. Not Daniel this time, his mother. She arrived uninvited at Scarlett's office in a silver Chanel suit, carrying an envelope thick with contracts. The receptionist tried to intervene, but Scarlett waved her in. She was ready. The older woman sat gracefully across from her, crossing her legs like she owned the building. "I'm not here to argue," she began. Tone clipped but polite. "Just to propose a solution." Scarlett folded her hands. "I've learned," the woman continued, "that there's value in understanding when to make peace. The family is prepared to offer $10 million. Scarlett blinked once. "For what?" "For your children. For their future. For their protection." Scarlett leaned back slowly. "They're not an investment," she said. "They're human beings, and that's why we want them raised with the full resources the Smith name affords." Scarlett's eyes didn't flinch. "They're already being raised with something far better, self-worth." The contract was detailed. Education trusts, international access, summer estates, inheritance rights, all conditional on Scarlett stepping down from full custody and agreeing to joint decision-making under Smith family advisement. A board, essentially, for 3 toddlers. Scarlett flipped through the pages, then closed the folder gently. "I walked away once because I didn't want a war," she said. "But don't mistake that for weakness." The older woman's expression flickered. "Think carefully," she warned. "This isn't just about you anymore." "You're right," Scarlett replied. "It never was." Scarlett filed for sole custody the next morning. Not out of revenge, not out of spite, out of clarity. The triplets deserved one stable home, one compass, one parent who wouldn't dangle love like a prize. Daniel was served the papers 2 days later. The shock in his voice when he called her wasn't anger. It was confusion. "You really think I'd try to take them from you?" he asked. Scarlett was quiet. "I think," she said gently, You let people who don't love them the way I do dictate too much of your life. He exhaled. This is going to turn ugly. No, it's going to turn legal. The headlines came fast. Ex-wife of tech mogul files for sole custody of Smith heirs, $10 million offer rejected in explosive custody move. Scarlett didn't read the comments, but her team did. Some called her strategic. Some called her brave. Others called her bitter. She stayed silent. Her lawyers spoke for her in court, and her children spoke for her in smiles, bedtime routines, and scribbled crayon art on refrigerator doors. The courtroom was cold. Daniel looked uncomfortable in his suit. Scarlett wore a cream pantsuit and minimal makeup. She sat upright, calm, unshaken. The judge asked questions about parenting schedules, education plans, discipline approaches. Scarlett answered clearly, lovingly. She spoke of the triplets' individual personalities, of how Ari needed structure, how Kai thrived on creative freedom, how Nova asked questions that deserved answers, not distractions. Daniel's lawyer pushed hard. They referenced Scarlett's travel schedule, media exposure, public-facing life. Scarlett's lawyer responded with documented care schedules, therapy assessments, and glowing pediatric reports. It was Daniel himself who broke form on day 3. During his testimony, when asked what role he played in their everyday life, he paused, longer than expected, then said, "Less than I should have." There was silence. Even his mother looked startled. Daniel cleared his throat. "My children deserve consistency, stability, the kind that isn't packaged in wealth but in presence." Scarlett didn't look at him, but her fingers trembled slightly. He wasn't lying. Not anymore. After the hearing, Daniel asked to speak with her in private. In a quiet corridor, he finally said what had been building for weeks. "I'm sorry." Scarlett stared at him. "For what, exactly?" "For letting my family speak for me. For not protecting you. For not protecting them from what power can look like when it's poisoned." She crossed her arms. "And now, I'm not fighting you anymore." Her heart jumped, but she didn't show it. "Then, withdraw." He nodded. "If you promise one thing." Scarlett raised an eyebrow. "That they know I tried, that they know I didn't give up, even if I gave in." She considered it, then nodded once. The judge's ruling came a week later. Sole custody granted to Scarlett Smith. Daniel would retain visitation, regular, flexible, compassionate. No board, no supervision, just fatherhood, earned through humility. That night, she took the triplets to the park. No security, no cameras. Just the 4 of them beneath a sky streaked with late summer gold. Nova skipped ahead. Ari asked 1,000 questions. Kai picked up every leaf he could carry. Scarlett sat on the bench and watched them. Free, unbought, unbroken, hers. It began with a bedtime story. Scarlett had written it in the dark, after a long day of depositions and media whispers. The kids were tucked in. The house was quiet, but her heart was loud. She sat at the kitchen table with a pen in hand, not her laptop, not a recorder, just ink and stillness. She didn't write to prove anything. She wrote because there were truths the court transcripts couldn't hold. "Dear Ari, you ask why I always check your lunchbox twice. It's because I remember the day you cried when I forgot the blue spoon. Not because it was special, but because it made things feel just right. That's what I try to be for you. Not perfect, just right. Dear Kai, your dreams are bigger than gravity. The way you built a spaceship out of cereal boxes tells me you won't wait for someone to hand you wings. I want to be the floor beneath your feet so you can jump. I want you to fly. Dear Nova, you asked me if love could change people. Yes, it can, but it shouldn't have to. I want you to know the kind of love that meets you at your best and doesn't flinch at your worst. And until then, I'll be that love for you." She didn't intend to submit the letters, but her attorney saw them in a folder one morning before court and said, on the final day of the hearing, the judge requested closing arguments. Scarlett stood. Not her lawyer, not a paralegal. Her. She stepped to the center of the courtroom, pulled the 3 folded letters from her coat pocket, and began to read. Her voice didn't tremble. She didn't dramatize. She simply shared what motherhood had taught her, that parenting wasn't about being flawless. It was about being willing. Willing to be wrong, to apologize, to stay up late with fevered brows, to learn cartoon. Character names by heart, to kneel beside scraped knees and broken hearts. It was about presence, not presence in theory, but in lunchboxes and lullabies. Daniel watched from his seat. He didn't interrupt, didn't look away. He'd given his statement already. But this was something else. Scarlett wasn't defending herself. She was defining love. The courtroom fell silent after she finished. No closing rebuttals, no objections. Just air filled with the echo of a mother's voice, raw and reverent. The judge leaned forward, then said quietly, "I've read hundreds of custody files, medical records, income reports, education plans." She tapped the letters gently on her desk. "But these are the first documents that made me understand what kind of home these children already have." It wasn't dramatic. There was no gavel slam, just a sentence. Full custody remains with the mother, but it felt like thunder. Outside the courthouse, cameras waited. Scarlett stepped out, head high, the triplets not with her, by design. This wasn't about spectacle. It was about space, about drawing boundaries between the public and the sacred. A journalist asked, "Do you have anything to say to families going through similar fights?" Scarlett turned, her voice calm. "Don't fight to win, fight to protect." Then she left. That evening, as the sun dipped beneath Atlanta's skyline, Scarlett walked into the nursery. Ari was building a tower of plastic blocks. Kai was painting rainbows on construction paper. Nova was curled up in bed, reading her favorite book upside down. Scarlett sat between them. She didn't tell them about the ruling. Not yet. She just read them a new story, one she hadn't shared before, about a woman who wrote letters to her children, not to change the world, but to remind them they already belonged in it. And when she kissed them goodnight, something shifted. Not in the room, in her. For years, she'd carried a quiet fear that love might not be enough, that maybe the courts, or society, or wealth, or legacy might weigh more on the scale. But tonight, she knew the truth. There is no dollar amount that could measure the worth of a mother who stays, not physically, emotionally, daily. Scarlett had stayed, and now she would continue, on her terms. The next morning she mailed the original letters, not to the court, not to the media, but to her children's future selves, each one sealed in an envelope labeled, "To be opened when the world feels heavy." Because even years from now, even when they outgrew bedtime stories, they would remember that love wasn't in the fight, it was in the writing. Atlanta, at dusk, shimmered like a city catching its breath. From the rooftop of the Monroe Arts Building, the skyline unfolded in soft pinks and purples. Strings of warm fairy lights curved above the railings, casting golden halos on the polished concrete. Scarlett stood at the edge in a black silk jumpsuit, hair caught in a crown of coils, her eyes reflecting the horizon. No cameras, no velvet rope. Just one small table with 2 chairs, a bottle of red, and a handwritten card folded neatly on a napkin. Tonight was not about spectacle. It was about choosing, without pressure, without fear. Choosing him. Elias arrived exactly on time. He wore a dark green blazer over a white shirt, sleeves rolled, collar open. No tie, no script. When he saw her standing there, backlit by amber glow, wind teasing the edges of her curls, he paused. His breath caught. And not because she looked beautiful, because she looked certain. "You said you liked sunsets," Scarlett said softly as he joined her. "I do. Well, I planned this one." He smiled. "You control the sky now?" She shrugged with a grin. "I know people." He laughed. It was low, unguarded, and she knew, in that sound, was a kind of peace he didn't find often. They didn't speak much at first. They ate, drank, talked about the triplets, how Nova asked if clouds ever got jealous of the moon, how Ari insisted he could fix the blender with brain powers, how Kai painted a portrait of Elias titled, "My Bonus Hero." And when the plates were cleared, when only the wine remained, Scarlett stood. Elias watched her, still seated, still uncertain, until she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I know this isn't traditional," she began. Elias froze. Scarlett continued, voice even, "But nothing about us has ever been." She stepped closer. "I spent years letting people write my future, then more years undoing their edits. But you..." She paused. "You never tried to rewrite me. You just read me. Every word, every chapter." Elias's eyes shimmered. "You never tried to fix me." You just stood beside me while I rebuilt myself." She opened the box. Inside, a ring, not flashy, not dainty. A solid matte gold band with 3 tiny stones nestled in its side. Ari, Kai, Nova. Elias stood now, stunned. Scarlett held his hand. "I want to do this with you. Not because I need rescuing, not because I need validation, but because I want us." He didn't speak, didn't need to. His hands found her waist. His forehead pressed to hers, and when he finally whispered, it wasn't yes. It was, "Thank you for not waiting for permission to love me." They didn't sign papers that night. They didn't make announcements, but they made a vow, spoken not into microphones but into skin, that their home would be a choice. Every day, every time, not earned through sacrifice, not held through obligation, but sustained by joy. Later, they danced. No music, just the hum of the city and the beat of shared breath. Scarlett's head rested on his chest, listening not for applause, but for the rhythm of a man whose love didn't require her to shrink, silence, or shapeshift. Elias whispered, "I never thought someone like you would want someone like me." Scarlett looked up, serious. "No," she said, "you never thought you were already someone like me." Then she kissed him, not softly, but like someone who had finally stopped apologizing for wanting everything. The stars were coming out now, and for the first time in a long time, Scarlett didn't need a spotlight. She was the light, and this rooftop vow between 2 whole people, was more sacred than any altar. The house was quiet again, not the kind of silence that feels empty, but the kind that feels earned, like a book closed gently at the end of a chapter. Scarlett stood barefoot in the hallway, watching the sun slip across the wooden floors, painting gold on everything it touched. The triplets were still asleep, at least for now, that sacred hour before the world asked anything of her. Before breakfast, before questions, before motherhood returned to its full symphony, just stillness, and breath, and being. Down the hall, a door creaked. Nova emerged first, hair wild and sleepy, dragging her pink blanket behind her like a cape. Scarlett opened her arms without a word. Nova melted into her chest. 1 breath. 2, 3. Then Kai padded in, already holding a notebook and a pencil, his voice a whisper. "I had a dream. I was a robot teacher." Scarlett kissed his curls. "Did you grade your own homework?" He nodded solemnly. "Straight A's." Scarlett grinned. Ari followed next, eyes sharp, already alert. "Is today a real school day or a learn to from life day?" "Both," Scarlett said, guiding them toward the living room. "Always both." They settled on the couch in a tangle of limbs and love. No TV, no music, just them. She passed out slices of pear, a tradition they'd started the week of the custody battle. Something sweet, something clean. Scarlett tucked Nova into her lap, Kai curled beside her, and Ari leaned across the armrest, sketching the family cat like it was a character in his graphic novel. For a moment, she just watched them, not with fear, not with worry, but with awe. 3 little lives, not trophies, not evidence, just truth. Ari asked, "Do we still have to visit Daddy's parents for Christmas?" Scarlett paused, then said carefully, "You get to decide that when you're older. Right now, we'll keep things simple." Kai piped up, "Can we just go to Uncle Marcus's and eat his burnt turkey again?" They all laughed, even Nova. "Sure," Scarlett smiled, "but you have to pretend it tastes amazing." Ari nodded. "Deal. Legacy over luxury." Scarlett's heart stilled at his words. "Where did you hear that?" "You said it to someone on the phone once." I remembered. Legacy over luxury. He was listening. They always were. Later that afternoon, while the triplets played outside in the backyard, Ari in a pirate hat, Nova with her crown of daisies, Kai building a rocket from cardboard, Scarlett sat on the porch with a notebook. Not for work, not for court, just for her. She didn't write poetry, or goals, or plans. She wrote 1 word, Scarlett, just her name. Simple, unadorned, no Smith, no hyphen, no guilt, no apology. It had taken her a long time to realize she didn't need applause. She just needed her name back. She remembered when she'd first changed it, rushing into the courthouse, full of excitement, thinking a new last name would unlock a new life. The Smith name came with access, with invitations, with assumptions, but it also came with shadows, with expectations, and with silence. Today, she wasn't discarding Daniel. She was reclaiming Scarlett, not just the name, the woman beneath it, the girl who once sketched dream houses in the back of composition books, the teen who memorized Maya Angelou under street lamps during power outages, the mother who braided hair and hopes into the same morning routine. Elias stepped outside carrying a tray of lemonade. "You okay?" he asked, setting it down. Scarlett nodded. "More than—" He kissed her shoulder. "Thinking, remembering," she said softly. "Letting go." They sat in silence, sipping from the same glass, watching their patch of sky shift as the triplets howled and sprinted through grass like it was a kingdom. Scarlett turned to him and said, "Do you ever wonder if we're doing enough?" Elias didn't answer right away. Then, every day, he reached for her hand. "But then I look at them, and I look at you, and I think maybe we already are." The wind picked up slightly. Nova twirled in her dress, yelling, "Look, I'm a tornado princess!" Kai shouted, "Prepare for liftoff in 5. Ari raised a toy sword and declared, "We fight for kindness." Scarlett laughed. It cracked through her like sunlight, not because they were perfect, but because they were theirs. That evening, after bath time and one too many bedtime negotiations, Scarlett sat on the floor of her bedroom surrounded by art, crayon masterpieces, paper crowns, and a glitter-covered wooden box Nova had made labeled, "Secrets Only Mama Can Open." Inside it, a rock, a candy wrapper, a drawing of a heart with stick figures labeled, "Me plus you equal to always." Scarlett cried quietly. Not the broken kind, the full kind, the kind that arrives when everything inside you is finally heard. She wiped her eyes, placed the box gently on her nightstand, and whispered to the ceiling, "Thank you for the silence. It helped me hear myself." She didn't need Daniel's apology, didn't need his parents' money, didn't even need validation from the world, because today, Scarlett had 3 living testaments to her choices, to her endurance, to her legacy. At dawn, she walked barefoot into the yard. The grass was wet, the air still. She looked at the sky and whispered the final words of her journal aloud. "I didn't win. I didn't conquer. I remembered, and I rebuilt. And I wrote my name in ink, not for them. For me." She turned, and there they were, the triplets at the back door, blinking sleepily. Ari rubbed his eyes. "Why are you outside, Mama?" Scarlett smiled, hands on hips. "Just checking the sky." "Why?" Kai asked. "To make sure it's still big enough for us." Nova reached for her hand. "It always is." They walked inside together, the 4 of them. No legacy carved in stone. No applause echoing behind them. Just love. Just laughter. Just names spoken fully and freely. And that was enough. More than enough. To the woman sitting in silence, wondering if anyone would notice if she disappeared. To the man who gave everything and was still called not enough. To the mother whose name was erased the moment she gave life. To the child inside you who still whispers, "Pick me." This is for you. This whole story, it wasn't just about Scarlett. It was about you. You've been overlooked, silenced, talked over, talked down to, left behind, or used when your shine was convenient and discarded when your boundaries became inconvenient. You've learned to speak softly, to shrink in rooms that should have honored you. You've learned to say it's okay when it wasn't, to laugh so you wouldn't cry, to stay quiet so someone else could stay comfortable. And maybe, somewhere along the way, you forgot your own name. But hear me now. You are not disposable. You are not dramatic. You are not too much. You are not hard to love. You are not the aftermath of someone else's choices. You are not the broken piece in someone else's empire. You are not who they said you were when they were afraid of your light. You are allowed to want more peace, more joy, more intimacy, more truth, more silence that heals, not silence that hides. You are allowed to say no, to leave the room, to stop explaining yourself, to choose your name over their legacy, to burn the script they handed you and write your own. You see, they told Scarlett she was lucky, that she should accept the deal, take the money, disappear, because that's what some people do when they realize you won't bow anymore. They tried to buy your silence, but here's the truth. Your story doesn't belong to their pocketbooks. Your motherhood isn't for auction. Your voice was never theirs to mute. Your worth can't be counted in digits. Your name is not for sale. Scarlett walked away from applause, from luxury, from access. Why? Because applause fades, luxury rusts. Access disappears the moment you become inconvenient. But legacy? Legacy is what lives in the names you reclaim, in the children you raise with integrity, in the mirror you finally face and say, I see you, and mean it. So I ask you now, what would happen if you stopped waiting for someone to save you? What would happen if you chose to be seen? Not curated, not filtered, but raw, real, whole. What would happen if you reclaimed your name? Maybe it's not Scarlett. Maybe it's Faith, Joy, Hope, Aaliyah, Rachel, Kim, Sade, Brittany, Eve, Danielle, you. Maybe it's the name you were born with, or the one you whispered to yourself in secret because it felt more like home. Maybe it's not about names at all. Maybe it's about you finally realizing you were never the problem. You were the pause in someone else's chaos. You were the mirror they couldn't look into without cracking. You were the softness they mistook for weakness. And now you've remembered you were made of steel under velvet all along. Let me say this plain. You do not need permission to matter. You do not need a marriage to feel chosen. You do not need applause to be powerful. You do not need a seat at their table if the table demands you silence your truth. You can build your own. You can sit on the floor and still be royal. You can crown yourself. So if this story stirred something in you, if Scarlett's fight felt like your reflection, then do this one thing for you, not for me. Reclaim your name. Out loud. Right now. Type it in the comments if you're ready. Whisper it to yourself if you're still gathering the courage. But say it, because your voice is holy, because your truth deserves oxygen, because your future is waiting for the sound of your full name, not their nickname for you, not their version of you, just you, whole, unapologetic, unpurchased, unbroken. You weren't made to live in corners. You weren't made to fade. You weren't made to survive on scraps of love. You were made to shine. And if no one has told you lately, you're not too late. You're not too old. You're not too ruined. You're not too quiet. You are just in time to remember who the hell you are. If this story lit something in you, leave a comment. Tell us what you're reclaiming. Share this video. Someone else in your life has forgotten their name too. Like it. Not for the algorithm, but for the you who stayed. Because if one person remembers who they are because you shared this story, then that's legacy. And that's louder than applause.